What is the debt ceiling, and why does it matter? The debt ceiling is a limit on the total amount of money that the United States can borrow to fund the government and meet its financial obligations. The debt ceiling was first put in place by Congress during World War I, and it has been raised 78 times since. The current debt ceiling is set at $31.4 trillion, which is more than 120% of U.S. The debt ceiling matters because if Congress fails to raise it by early June, the U.S. government could default on its debt. This means that the government would not be able to pay its bills, such as interest on the national debt, Social Security benefits, military salaries, and other essential services. A default would have serious consequences for the U.S. economy and the global financial system. It could trigger a rise in interest rates, a drop in the value of the dollar, a loss of confidence in U.S. creditworthiness, and a recession. To avoid a default, Congress needs to either raise or suspend the debt ceiling before the deadline. However, this is not an easy task, as there is a partisan divide over how to deal with the national debt. Republicans are demanding that an increase in the borrowing limit be accompanied by spending cuts and other cost savings. Democrats are opposed to any conditions on raising the debt ceiling, arguing that it is a necessary and responsible step to pay for programs that have already been authorized by Congress. President Biden has said he will not negotiate over the debt ceiling, and he has invited Republican and Democratic leaders to the White House to discuss a path forward. The fight over the debt ceiling could sink the economy if no agreement is reached in time. This is how we got here, and this is why it matters. The U.S. debt ceiling crisis is a looming threat to the stability of the global economy and the political future of the country. The debt ceiling is a limit imposed by Congress on the amount of debt that the federal government can have outstanding. As of December 2021, the debt limit has been set at $28.9 trillion, but the Treasury Department has warned that it will run out of cash to pay its bills soon after June 1st. If Congress doesn't raise or suspend the debt ceiling by then, it could lead to a default on U.S. obligations, such as interest payments, Social Security benefits, and military salaries. What are the implications for the primary elections? The primary elections are scheduled to take place between January and June 2024, when voters will choose their party's nominees for the presidential and congressional races. The debt ceiling crisis could have a significant impact on the political landscape and public opinion ahead of these crucial contests, especially for President Biden and his agenda. First, a default could trigger a severe economic recession, as financial markets would lose confidence in U.S. creditworthiness and demand higher interest rates for lending to the government. This would increase borrowing costs for businesses and consumers, reduce investment and spending, and cause widespread job losses and income losses. A recession would hurt Biden's chances of winning re-election, as voters would blame him for mismanaging the economy and failing to prevent a default. It would also hurt his party's chances of retaining control of Congress, as voters would seek a change in leadership. Second, a default could undermine Biden's domestic policy goals, such as his Build Back Better plan, which aims to invest in infrastructure, social programs, climate action, and health care. A default would limit the government's ability to finance these initiatives, as it would face higher borrowing costs and lower tax revenues. It would also make it harder for Biden to negotiate with Congress on passing his legislation, as he would face more resistance from Republicans who oppose increasing spending and debt. A default would weaken Biden's credibility and authority as a leader who can deliver on his promises. Third, a default could damage Biden's foreign policy objectives, such as restoring U.S. leadership and alliances, confronting China and Russia, and addressing global challenges like COVID-19 and climate change. A default would erode U.S. influence and reputation in the world, as it would signal that the U.S. is unreliable and irresponsible in honoring its commitments. It would also reduce U.S. military and diplomatic resources and capabilities, as it would force the government to cut back on defense spending and foreign aid. A default would embolden U.S. adversaries and undermine U.S. allies who depend on U.S. security guarantees. In summary, the debt ceiling crisis could have dire consequences for the primary elections by hurting Biden's economic performance, policy agenda, and international standing. It could also affect the political landscape and public opinion by shifting voter preferences and party dynamics. The debt ceiling crisis could be a decisive factor in determining who will win the White House and Congress and how are other countries reacting to the debt ceiling crisis. Discuss how U.S. allies and adversaries are watching the situation closely and what impact it could have on global trade, security, and diplomacy. The U.S. debt ceiling crisis is not only a domestic problem, but also a global one. The U.S. is the world's largest economy, and its debt is widely held by foreign governments and investors. If the U.S. fails to raise or suspend its borrowing limit by June 1st, it could default on its obligations and trigger a financial meltdown that would affect markets and economies around the world. How are other countries reacting to this looming threat? Some of them are worried, some are frustrated, and some are hoping for a resolution. U.S. allies, such as the European Union, Japan, Canada, and Australia, are concerned about the potential spillover effects of a U.S. default on their own economies and financial systems. They are also worried about the implications for global security and stability, as the U.S. is a key partner in many international alliances and agreements. They are urging the U.S. to act responsibly and swiftly to avoid a catastrophic outcome. U.S. adversaries, such as China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are watching the situation closely and may try to exploit it for their own interests. They may see a U.S. default as a sign of weakness and an opportunity to challenge its leadership and influence in the world. They may also use it as a propaganda tool to undermine the credibility and legitimacy of the U.S. and its democratic system. The impact of a U.S. default on global trade, security, and diplomacy could be severe and lasting. A U.S. default could disrupt the flow of goods and services across borders, as many transactions are denominated in U.S. dollars or rely on U.S. financial institutions. It could also undermine confidence in the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency and erode its role in the international monetary system. A U.S. default could also damage the reputation and trustworthiness of the U.S. as a global leader and partner. It could weaken its ability to project power and influence abroad, as well as its commitment to uphold its obligations and agreements with other countries. In short, a U.S. default would be a disaster not only for the U.S. itself, but also for the rest of the world. That is why many countries are hoping that Congress will reach a deal soon to raise or suspend the debt ceiling and avoid a worst-case scenario.